years ago, I quit my full-time job to experiment with the idea of location independence. Now, what that meant was that I lived and worked in different parts of Asia, South America, the Middle East, all while building an online marketing company called Magnifyre. Now, in that time, I had the opportunity to do some pretty cool adventures. So I have trekked the Amazon jungle, I've sandboarded in the Atacama Desert, I've ridden horses on the steppes of Mongolia. And while those were all awe-inspiring experiences, what's been most transformative for my life and how I do business is actually the people that I encountered along the way. And so I want to start today just by sharing one of those stories with you. Last summer, I was living in Istanbul, Turkey with a friend when we were invited to have dinner with a couple of Syrian guys that we had met along the way. I'm not one to say no to free food, especially if there's the potential for hummus involved, and so I happily obliged. And I remember sitting in his living room around a fold-out table on a couple of couches as my friend started to tell the story of how he ended up in Istanbul. You see, a few years prior, my friend had been studying economics in Syria when the civil war broke out. He was just a few months away from graduation when he received news that his life was in imminent danger due to his involvement in the revolution. And so that night, he ended up packing a bag, leaving his friends and family, and forfeiting his education so that he could seek safety in Istanbul, Turkey. He went on to tell us about some of the relationships in his life. A lot of his friends had passed away due to the conflict. Some were on their way to Europe, and he was just sort of in a holding pattern until he could figure out where to go next. After he finished telling us that story, he asked us, two American girls, why we had ended up in Istanbul, which is a fair question. And we had a laundry list of reasons. We both love history and adventure. We also followed the news, and so we knew that this was a hot place in the world and just wanted to see it firsthand while we had the opportunity. And I'll never forget his response. He looked at us and he said, "You girls speak of curiosity and adventure, but I came for safety." And I remember in that moment feeling very naive and also very powerless, because typically when somebody tells you a story like that, you want to respond with a comparable story, one that has a happy ending, maybe to instill some encouragement for the future. But the fact was that I had no comparable experience to pull from. I had no word of encouragement to offer. In fact, there was really nothing I could do or say. All I could do was just shut up and listen. And so I remember leaving that night with a fresh set of eyes for the Syrian crisis. You know, I'd read a lot of the news. I passed people every day on my way to work, but it wasn't until that conversation that the numbers and the words became a face in a story, and it was somebody that I cared about. I think that when most people talk about the concept of empathy, they like to refer to it as a perspective-taking exercise. So, as a marketer, I love to tell my clients, hey, picture yourself in your customer's shoes. I'm sure many of you have done that exercise as well. But I think it's one thing to cognitively understand that people have different experiences, and an entirely different thing to actually feel with them. And the difference for me was a personal experience. That's what took empathy from my head to my heart. Psychologist and author Daniel Goleman talks about 3 different levels of empathy. This has become a conversation. The first level that he talks about is called cognitive empathy, which is simply knowing that people have different thoughts and emotions. So if you're a manager, this is an essential skill for you to have because you have to motivate your employees to go do things, right? The next level is called emotional empathy. And with emotional empathy, we actually feel with the other person as if their emotions are contagious. Social neuroscience calls this emotional contagion mirror neurons. So emotional empathy essentially means that we're well attuned to what's happening in the inner emotional world of another individual. We all hope that doctors have emotional empathy, right? The third level is called empathic concern. Now, with this kind of empathy, we not only understand a person's predicament and we're able to feel with them, but we're compelled to take action. So empathic concern is simply an outward expression of cognitive and emotional empathy. And when we take time to cultivate empathic concern and make it part of our operating system, then we start to examine the tools and resources around us and how they can make a positive impact on the stories that we've entered. And so for me, this meant that I wanted to revisit the conversation that we were having in Magnifyre. I was done doing business just to do business. I wanted business to be an outward expression of the empathic concern that was happening inside of me. And so our team, we have a team of 7. We've expanded our focus to include socially conscious businesses. We've partnered with NGOs and nonprofits to do skills-based training on how to use digital tools to tell their story. And in that process, I've discovered an entire culture of people and businesses who are using their time and energy to do good in the community. We have a lot of names for these organizations: B Corps, socially conscious businesses, businesses for good. But what's interesting is that all of the founders of those organizations have had profound personal experiences that have taken them past the first 2 levels of empathy to the 3rd. The thing is that they started by going into the experience without an agenda, which allowed them to identify a need and then respond appropriately. It started with the story, not an idea. 6 months ago, I relocated, settled down in San Diego, California, which happens to be a top destination for refugees who are entering the United States. In fact, 3,500 every year come to San Diego County from Asia, Africa, just to call it home. My experience with my friend in Istanbul triggered a deep desire just to get involved with what was happening in San Diego. And so I ended up building a relationship with this Congolese family who had arrived shortly before I had in San Diego. And we've just become friends. We do life together. They've taught me how to cook African food, which they have assured me will make me an excellent wife. I took them to the mountains over the winter to see snow for the first time. My favorite memory, though, was when I got invited to go to a dowry negotiation. This happened in San Diego. And the price of the dowry was determined in cows. Really fun. Just by doing life with this family, I've had the opportunity and really the privilege just to hear about the struggles that they face. And one of the biggest challenges, aside from simply learning English, is finding a job. And so when one of my local clients in San Diego approached me and said, "Hey, Mallory, we're looking for some local seamstresses for our products. Do you know anyone?" I was able to introduce him to my friend. He ended up lending her a sewing machine, so she now works from home. Furthermore, he's planning on opening a sewing cooperative where people can come and rent a sewing machine to work on their personal projects or to build their own business if they choose. It may sound ordinary, but I think it's rather extraordinary because it's making San Diego a more compassionate place in a very real way. I think that ultimately, travel taught me 2 things about empathy. First, that it's more about choice than common ground. And second, that it's a powerful change agent. When we allow ourselves to become a part of the stories around us, we have the opportunity and the privilege to look at our time and energy and figure out ways that we can positively make an impact. Now, you might be sitting here and thinking to yourself, "Okay, Mallory, well, I don't have the time to travel the world," which is totally fine. The thing is that we live in an increasingly digital, diverse, and cause-oriented world. And as our world gets smaller, our capacity to make an impact gets larger. Isn't that beautiful? And so I think, as you go back to your business ventures today, I just want to encourage you to ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, what does it look like to just get involved in the stories around you? And number 2, what does it look like to use the tools and resources at your disposal to make a positive impact on those stories? And if you so feel inclined to take action on those feelings, can I just encourage you to do it? Because I think what you'll discover in the process is why you got into business to begin with: to see a need, to meet it, and to make a positive impact on the community. It's a noble goal and one well within reach whenever we decide to cultivate empathic concern. Thank you.